Hi, my name is Rachel Lloyd. I'm the founder and executive director of GEMS, Girls Educational and Mentoring Services. GEMS is the largest provider of services in the U.S. to domestically trafficked and commercially sexually exploited girls and young women. We've been serving girls and young women ages 12 to 24 who've been in the commercial sex industry since 1998. This month is our 15-year anniversary, and so we're excited to be online, share some of the things that we've learned. We haven't figured out everything, but we've developed some program models that I'm going to spend a few minutes sharing with you today. So I want to set the stage a little bit in terms of kind of the program approach that we take and some of the program approaches that we've seen happen in the anti-trafficking movement. When we think of kind of the trafficking piece, we tend to think of rescue. And so lots of programs are framed around a very rescue-based model that may meet the initial needs of a young person, but often don't meet the long-term needs. And so rescue may be something that you literally need to do at 3 o'clock in the morning to help somebody get out of danger, but rescue isn't a long-term plan for anybody's life. That needs to look like empowerment. And so we use an empowerment model and really stay away from the kind of rescue framework, even though that crisis piece is part of our work often. But the empowerment piece and helping young people grow long term and build past their experiences of commercial sexual exploitation and trafficking is really, really critical. So our model is called Victim, Survivor, Leader. And so we recognize that at each stage of the kind of process and that there are stages that people need different things, and what that looks like is gonna change over time. I think when we think about victims of trafficking, we're often thinking about just serving them in that victim stage, and that looks like crisis care and addressing the initial trauma, practical services, etc. But we often kind of miss the longer term healing, and the victim focus. While our work should be victim centered, it shouldn't be victim focused. We should see people as more than their trauma. Trauma is one thing that's happened to them. The trafficking experience is one part of their lives, but treating them as if this is their entire kind of story is problematic and leads people to kind of perpetually identify often as victims. And we want people to move from that victim stage, and we know that people can. I know that I have as a survivor and as a leader, and so it's really important to think about kind of those stages. So I'll talk a little bit about kind of the three stages, and then I'll talk about one of the models that we use called stages of change and why that's so critical in terms of the work we do. So as I said, the victim stage is really when we're first initially working with people. It may be girls or young women who are still under the control of their trafficker. We have an alternative to incarceration program. So instead of going to jail, girls are sent to us if they've been arrested. Young women are sent to us if they've been arrested on prostitution charges. And so girls may come in at that stage very resistant to the idea of services. And I think it's important to recognize, right, we build up levels of denial in order to survive. And so breaking down those walls all in one go with a big steamroller is really unhelpful. We have to take the walls down brick by brick with the person that we're working to support. And it's really about working alongside someone as opposed to kind of a top-down, I'm the service provider, you're the client approach that it's often kind of condescending, but recognizing that people are experts in their own lives and they know their needs and they can articulate those. And so being able to hear from people, even in those initial stages, what they need. And often that can look like giving people choice when you've been under the control of a trafficker, when you've been in the commercial sex industry, many of your choices have been taken from you. And so to be able to provide choice, whether it's somebody staying in your crisis housing and saying lights on, lights off, door closed, door open, being able to give people small choices that begin to make them feel more confident about the bigger choices, because they're going to have to make larger choices about whether they stay in the shelter, whether they return to family, right? Those are really, really overwhelming choices. And so being able to give them as many small choices in the beginning as possible is really important. Um, I think we sometimes want to, my good friend Lisa Goldblack Grace, who runs a great program called My Life, My Choice, often says, like, don't go for the trauma. And I think as service providers, sometimes we think initially in that victim stage when somebody's coming in that we need to explore everything that they've ever been through and find out the age of first sexual abuse. And people often aren't ready to go there. And it may not be healthy for them to go there at that point. When you're really able to engage in healthy kind of clinical work or therapeutic work or counseling, and begin to explore some of the trauma that has happened to you, that often requires like real stability in your life. That's generally not when you're in kind of a very, very crisis transitional stage. And so, right, it's about asking the questions that allow us to get to meet the needs that we need to meet in that moment, but not really about kind of trying to dig for everything. There's lots of layers of trauma with the young people that we work with. The trafficking is one part of that trauma. There's often childhood trauma, sexual abuse, domestic violence, layers and layers of trauma that have happened before. And while we need to address kind of the symptoms of that, can't address immediately all those different layers. It's just not feasible. So that victim stage, and I think a lot of programs, and I would guess that a lot of providers who are kind of engaging in this conference are doing a lot of good work around that victim stage. And I think that's a piece that a lot of people kind of get. The survivor piece begins to lose people a little. And this is as people begin to transition from that kind of victim stage into what does life look like as a survivor, as somebody who maybe this isn't the only issue I have going on. Maybe that housing issue is my primary issue right now. Maybe employment is my primary issue. Maybe I don't always want to talk about the trafficking experience or be identified by the trafficking experience. And so providing critical opportunities at those stages for employment, for education, for empowerment programming, for recreation, for therapeutic support, right? Being able to help people build support networks, both within the programs that might be serving them and outside of the programs that are serving them, and helping them, right, begin to really establish a life. I mean, I think, I often hear about like, well, we need to help girls return to normal society. Right, normal society is the folks who've been buying girls in the first place. So, right, normal society has many issues, and the idea of kind of normal, but there is kind of a reintegration process into coming back into a world that you may have been gone from for a while. That while normal may not always be healthy on many levels, but how do you begin to take those steps to re-engage in school, to engage in school for the first time, to begin to build relationships with family members if that's possible. And so this is a really critical piece, and oftentimes this stage can get really boring for young people, and we often think that the most kind of tricky stage is that early victim stage when people are still really struggling with mixed feelings about whether they wanted to leave their trafficker, the normalcy of the trafficking experience, but particularly for young people who've been in it for a long time, can feel really scary to be in something new. And so we think that that's kind of like the most dangerous time for young people to kind of relapse or to go back. But the survivor stage can actually be really challenging in terms of the monotony of regular life. While trauma and drama are painful and awful, there's a level of adrenaline and kind of excitement that is happening, even when it's unhealthy excitement, and particularly for children who've grown up in homes with domestic violence, with sexual abuse, right, where you never quite knew what was going to happen on any given day. Was your father going to hit your mother? Was somebody going to hurt you? And so, right, you've lived your life in a constant state of kind of being on the edge and this kind of adrenaline. And so when you've left and you're beginning this kind of stable life, that can get really tough. There's a depression that sinks in, and we know with studies from domestic violence victims that depression generally hits after you've left. When you're in a domestic violence situation, when you're in a trafficking situation, it can be hard to be fully clinically depressed because you are dealing with so much trauma every single day. But it's when the danger, the immediate danger is past, that everything can kind of come on top and begin to overwhelm you. And so that, the young people that we work with are often saying, I'm doing the right thing and it's so boring and all I do is get up and go to school and come home and get up and go to school and come home. And so there's that balance of being able to teach young people that, right, regular life is often quite boring. Stable life is kind of boring. And we have to build healthy ways of excitement, because otherwise we find that young people will go back to something that feels familiar, just to feel something again. And there can often be a period of real numbing for the young people that we've worked with, because they've separated from their feelings for so long because they had to. And so checking in with folks and saying, what's the emotion you have today? Can you describe that for me? And that can be really tough when you've been taught to not show emotion or not feel emotion for a really long time. So that survivor stage, it's really about how do we engage and support young people in leaving one life and beginning to build something else. And there's often a big gap between the leaving and the rebuilding of a relatively interesting, healthy life. And that gap period, when you're waiting to start school, when you're waiting to get into a good housing program, when you're in that kind of waiting period, it can be really, really challenging. And so that piece is just as critical in terms of engagement and support on the part of the service provider and the counselor, as is the victim piece. I would say one of the things that we see in the kind of victim stage is often, especially in the first few days, week or so, is a real euphoria about freedom. And I've left him, I've never got to deal with that again, I'm free, nobody's ever going to hurt me again. Euphoria doesn't tend to, and anger, right? I'm really angry about what has been done to me. That doesn't tend to continue and won't hold you for long. Anger isn't a sustainable emotion like that. And so being able to talk to young people and explain that I totally get that you feel like this right now, and that's great. If those feelings change, that's okay. And so when young people who are in our programs think that we expect them to never want to go back and just embrace freedom wholeheartedly, and don't have the space to be able to talk about, yeah, it was traumatic, and sometimes there are things that I miss in a safe and healthy context to be able to have those discussions. Right, that stuff is getting internalized, and they're beginning to feel like there's something wrong with them. They're feeling guilty about their feelings. They're thinking that, right, I must be crazy, and they begin to think, well, if I feel like this, that must be a sign that I'm supposed to go back. That must be a sign that this is kind of who I am. And so being able to prepare people for that mix of emotions and those conflicting feelings that are going to happen, and creating a very safe environment for folks to be able to talk about it. And that's true very true in the victim stage, but also true in the survivor stage. And being able to have survivor-informed programming is really critical. I think one of the strengths of our programming has really been the survivor leadership component of our work. And so having folks who have been through commercial sexual exploitation, through trafficking, through the commercial sex industry, who can say it's actually really normal to feel like this, and these feelings will pass, but this isn't strange or abnormal, or you're not crazy. This is just part of the process, is really important for young people who are experiencing all these emotions and have no idea, they have no gauge to be able to tell, do other people feel like this? Do other people miss their pimps? Do other people sometimes feel like maybe they should go back or this is all they're worth. And so having folks within your program who have had those experiences and can work as staff and support young people is incredibly important, and creates a sense of safety and belonging that young people don't find really anywhere else. And so as young people kind of move through that survivor stage, and wrestling with kind of, right, this new life and the boredom, and when we're working with teenagers, right, boredom is just a reality anyway, um, and beginning to navigate relationships and school and work and all of those things, um, ensuring that even when people are doing really well, that we're still able to give them a space to talk about, right, the other feelings that might be coming up. And then, right, there's also a point, and I think this is the critical piece, is that I've seen folks in the field have a conception that kind of, right, once you've been through trafficking, you'll never quite really heal. Like we might be able to help you get a job somewhere, but right, that'll kind of be it. That's the best we can expect for you. And so programs can end up continually addressing the trafficking piece and not recognizing that this is now, right, a couple of years past, 5 years past. This may not be what the young person actually needs to address. Their bigger issues might be trying to get into college, trying to start a family and being a parent, navigating, right, an adult relationship, a healthy adult relationship for the first time. And so, right, ensuring that we can create a continuum of programming that addresses young people at that stage too, at the leadership stage. And when we talk about leadership, I think folks often think that we're talking about, right, armies of young people who are going out and, advocating against this issue. And that might look like leadership for some young people, but that's not leadership for everybody. And so we want to talk about leadership in a much broader context, as leadership in your own life, leadership in your family, leadership in your community, and right, leadership in the world on some level, whatever that looks like for you. And so not assuming that a leadership program or programming looks like everybody kind of going through the same track of advocacy or public speaking about this issue. For some young people, that might be what they want to do. And those are conversations that have to be had really thoughtfully about whether this is the right time in someone's life. We often see folks in that victim stage, that early victim stage, 3 weeks out saying, I want to help girls. I'm ready to go tell my story. I want to go run a group with girls and share how I'm free now. 3 weeks out is probably not the best time for you to be doing that, as much as you may feel compelled to, right? We want to make sure that you're in a stable place and a healthy place first, before you're kind of put out there, and that stuff may be really, really triggering. So, right, being able to give people incremental opportunities for leadership at the victim stage, at the survivor stage, and obviously at the leadership stage, but making sure it's incremental and it's not too much too soon. And then making sure, right, particularly when we're in that leadership stage, making sure that it's not too little, and that the leadership opportunities that we're providing for young people and young adults, and survivors of any age are authentic and not token, that it's not about, right, we have a panel of experts and we need a survivor. The survivor is an expert and should be seen in that context. And so I think we have to be very careful in terms of how we treat survivors, particularly in that leadership stage, and assuming that all survivors have to bring to the table is their story, and creating real and authentic opportunities for survivors to be leaders in multiple areas and to share expertise and recommendations and work on policy initiatives and work on issues that are not about trafficking, and engage in careers that have nothing to do with social service provision or nonprofit advocacy or any of those things. And so how we support, young people at that stage is really important, and modeling really healthy, especially for girls who have, right, are growing up in a world where girls are devalued, and sexualized and objectified, providing strong female role models who are engaging in a multitude of kind of careers and diverse opportunities and occupations and have a variety of different lifestyles is really important for girls to be able to kind of see themselves in that space. And I'll say again, the need for survivor staff and survivor leadership within programs provides an opportunity for girls to come in programs and see, okay, that's what this could look like for me in a year, in 3 years, in 10 years. I think, again, one of the strengths about GEMS is the community that we've created, and that girls and young women get as much out of their relationships with their peers, their older kind of sisters, with the alumni staff who've come through the program, with our youth leadership group. They're able to see girls and young women and adult staff like me and other staff that we have, who are survivors and who are in leadership roles, but they're able to see what healing and recovery looks like at different stages, and relate to that as they move through those stages. And so it's important for people to be able to see themselves in the staff, in the place that they come to for services, and right, that looks like being culturally competent and responsible in terms of ensuring that the staff that you hire and that you have reflect the population that you serve. So one of the kind of key parts of the work that we do, though, in addition to the stages, the 3 stages of change, the 3 stages of our kind of program model, is our stages of change model. And it's not ours. We borrowed it from Prochaska and Di Clemente. It's a model that's been used in substance abuse treatment, eating disorders, smoking cessation, kind of you name it, in terms of changing behavior. And so we found that, often people will say, well, this person's ready to leave the sex industry or ready to escape from trafficking. This person's not ready. That's a very black and white kind of description, right? That's like you're either in this camp or you're in this camp. And if you're in the not ready camp, then there's nothing we can really do for you, or we're going to try and force you to be in the ready camp. Forcing people to be ready rarely works. And so the stages of change model recognizes that change is kind of more nuanced, and that there are a variety of stages that people might be at. And I encourage you, if you're not familiar with the stages of change model, or you can Google it kind of anywhere, and there's lots of good articles about it. And so the initial stage of change starts with kind of pre-contemplation. And often we're meeting young people, particularly who are still under the control of their pimp, their trafficker, who are in that pre-contemplation stage. And that looks like, I'm good, I'm fine, I don't need any help, leave me alone, I don't need anything from you, I'm happy, you don't know what you're talking about. And often we see service providers or law enforcement or whoever at that, when they're hearing that, their automatic response is to like push really hard in the other direction, to say, you don't understand how dangerous this is, and you don't, right, like he doesn't love you, and this is really bad for you. All that does is really shut someone down. I mean, as we know in domestic violence work, telling somebody like this person doesn't love you is actually really unhelpful in those beginning stages. And so, right, all it does is make the person kind of more defensive of the exploiter, of the abuser. And so being able to help somebody get from kind of pre-contemplation to the next stage, which is contemplation, is really important, and not expecting somebody to get from pre-contemplation all the way to action in like one conversation, or right, you have to go through those stages yourself. So when we've got someone in pre-contemplation and they're saying, this is working for me, this is okay, I'm fine, this is my life, you don't understand, right, our goal at that stage is really to help somebody begin to kind of wrestle with the dichotomy of the dependence on the life and the things that that might bring, but the real challenges that they are more than aware of. And so again, right, we may have pushed those things down and be in kind of denial about what that might look like. So simple kind of things that we'll do is a pros and cons list. And that's something that we'll have the young person write. And on one side it'll say, you know, things, times my pimp has made me happy, times he's made me cry. You know, things that I like about my situation, things I don't like. And we'll let them just go, right? We don't tell them what to put on there. They go and they write it. And we see kind of, you can watch this process of the initial, like, right, reasons I love him, or ways he's nice to me, or things that I like about that, right? Like that happens very, very quickly, but it's pretty short. The other piece you see somebody really wrestling with, but then that list gets really, really long. And so, right, then it's about processing that list with young people and saying, you know, on this one side, I see that you've said, you know, he says he loves me, or I'm able to get money, or I have somewhere to stay. And then on the other side, there's like 40 things that, like, he beats me, and I got an STD, and right, there's this like litany of trauma and abuse and pain. And so being able to talk about how do you get some of the things that are on the pros list, somewhere to stay, people who love you, people who tell you you're important, right? Like, how do you get that feeling of belonging, the economic security, those things that may keep people, how do you get that without having all of this? And so that's that kind of contemplation stage where we're helping people kind of wrestle with those ideas and begin to think about, right, do the cons outweigh the pros? And yes, right, is the short answer to that. And then the next stage is preparation. And so that really looks like, right, we've gone through contemplation and we've begun to weigh up, you know, I love my pimp, but I really don't like getting beat, and I'm really, really tired of it. And so the next step is really about preparation. What would it look like if you left? What steps would you need to take in order to leave safely? And so developing safety plans, and right, again, you can use stuff from the domestic violence work and tailor that to this population, but really helping people think through kind of what that preparation stage may look like. And right, our natural instinct is to like run in and just grab somebody out, or say leave in the next 10 minutes. But that may not be exactly where they're at. And so pushing too hard, right? We're being conscious of safety issues, obviously, and right, when it's a situation that is critically moving towards being incredibly unsafe. All trafficking is unsafe, but right, we have to use discretion about when we're able to help somebody begin to at least feel that kind of preparation stage through. And for some people that may take an hour. For some people that may take weeks or even months. And that's a critical process. And then kind of moving from preparation into action. And that's right when folks just kind of leave. And then the next stage after that is really maintenance. And that's about using the stages of change model. Maintenance looks like 6 months or so of kind of exiting of new behavior of whatever. And so, and then part of the stages of change, and one of the most critical parts is relapse. And so recognizing that that's part of the stages of change, and that young people may go back to abusive and exploitive situations. And that doesn't mean that they don't want help. It doesn't mean that they like it. It doesn't mean that they're enjoying it. It doesn't mean any of those things. It's just part of the change process. And if we think about kind of our own lives, and if we had a live audience right now, I would ask people, right, who've struggled with quitting smoking, or exercise, diet, or any, right, budgeting, anything that you've worked, or leaving a relationship, anything that you've had to work to change in your life. You didn't wake up one morning and just say, that's it, I'm done. You may think that you did that, but you've gone through all those, right? Your brain was kind of going through all those stages. But for most of us, right, whether it's, you know, on New Year's Day, we start an exercise program and we're super excited, and right, we've been thinking about it, but in the run up to January, and we bought all our little equipment and our sneakers and our weights. And for 3 days we do it, or for 3 weeks we do it, or we sign up for a gym and, we never go. And so that can be a really tough period at that relapse stage. And right, if you've ever kind of right quit smoking or started an exercise program or gone on a diet and then gone backwards, you know how difficult that stage is and how humiliating it can be to say that to other people in your life. And so when young people do go back to their exploiters, to an abusive situation, their natural instinct is to stay away from the folks who were supporting them in their exiting. There's a lot of shame. There's a lot of guilt. Right. They're not going to understand why I went back. I don't want to see anybody because they're going to look at me like I'm stupid. And so, right, making sure that young people know that the programs that we're creating and that we're building are safe for people to practice leaving, to go back as many times as it takes and to leave as many times as it takes, in order to be able to kind of get to the point where this feels okay. And so when people are in relapse, and we know this through substance abuse work, right, we want to talk about, well, what were the triggers? What were the things that made you feel like you wanted to go back? And that might have been, right, hearing from a family member. It might have been losing a job or something that was kind of that triggering moment that sent somebody back into an exploitive situation. And so how do we help you identify those triggers ahead of time? And how do we help you build in some safeguards? So if those same things come up, which, right, stuff happens and life is difficult. And so, right, how do we help you build resiliency around that? How do we help you build a strong support network? How do we let you know that it's right, the change is hard and it's a process and it's okay? And so the stages of change model we use with both the kind of exiting the commercial sex industry, escaping trafficking, and education, right? So people are like, I don't want to go to school. I'm fine. I have no interest in school. And then it's like, maybe I could see why school might be helpful. And then it's right, okay, I could go in September, and these are the things I could do to get ready for school. And then it's I'm actually going to school, and then right, sometimes people make it through the semester, and sometimes people make it through 3 weeks, and now they're not going. And it's important, I think. People often feel like when they relapse that they've gone back all the way back to the beginning, and that's not true, because you've had a period of what freedom looks like. You've had a period of what being in school looks like. You've had a period of what it looks like to not be using substances, and how good that felt. And so, right, you can build upon the memory and the knowledge of that when you're working with someone to help them support going back. Remember how excited you were when you were first going to school, and you really enjoyed that teacher, and right, so that people don't feel like that period was a waste. It absolutely wasn't. There was lots that were gained from that, and sometimes it right, change takes a lot of practice, and I think it's critical as service providers to be really conscious. And I would encourage you, if you're training other service providers around this, particularly people who don't have much background in working with sexually exploited youth, to really think about the stages of change in relation to their own lives, and how hard change is, right? As adults with like the resources that we need, right? Change is hard. And so how much harder is it for a young person who probably doesn't have all the resources that they need, and has experienced massive trauma and right, has been under the control of somebody else? It's doubly, triply complex. And so bringing it back though to things that people can relate to, that professionals can relate to personally, I think is a really critical step in terms of ensuring that empathy piece kind of stays. And so, right, we want to build programs that are safe for people to be at the stage of change that they're at, and whether that's right the pre-contemplative or its action or its maintenance, that at each stage we're able to hear what people are saying to us and kind of be able to to define, all right, I think this person, obviously no one's life is this incredibly like linear diagram model, right? It's a little bit more wavy than that. But right, being able to hear what kind of stage do I think this young person is in, and what do they need to hear from me? And so, right, I mean, all the way through, people need to have non-judgmental support and consistency and honesty. Those are things that kind of cut across all stages. Love and acceptance and right belief in you as a human being. That just kind of cuts across. But right at each stage, we can be thinking about how do I support this young person exactly where they're at, and how do I kind of help them move just to the next stage. It's not about getting them all the way into kind of maintenance, so that right somebody comes in at 3 o'clock in the morning, you're like, okay, in 6 weeks you're going to be working and back in school, right? I mean, maybe, but it's a lot more complex than that. And I think as well that it's a much better for the young people that we work with, and a much more healthy approach to change and to support. But it's also really critical in terms of ourselves as service providers, and that feeling of, right, my job is to like save and rescue you. And that isn't our job. Our job is not to save people. We may go in and right help people escape in the moment, but we can't take control of like their lives, and that's not our job. And so to be able to empower people, because we want to build resiliency, and recognizing the resiliency that survivors already have, the inherent resiliency that has enabled them to to make it through this far. We tell young people, right, whatever you had to do to get to the stage and stay alive, right, you survived. And so you have nothing to be ashamed of in terms of what you've had to kind of live through or do, because you're here. And sometimes that's enough, right? And so I think it's important to think of ourselves. I'm going to wrap up here, but as as kind of seed planters, as opposed to florists, right? Our job is to plant the seed, to be consistent, to be supportive, to model healthy relationships and healthy behavior, to create the resources and the practical support, and to know that in our interactions with young people and folks who've been trafficked, that we we did we gave 110% in those interactions, and whether somebody was at a stage in the change process and their healing, where they were able to immediately kind of receive that or not, we have to trust that the process works, and that right what we were able to give to somebody in that moment, will resonate, and hopefully they'll come in, even if we don't get to see them again, they'll come into contact with somebody else who will treat them with respect and dignity and support, and right, and so that begins to build, and that begins to shift the way that you feel about yourself and the way that you feel about the world around you, and the options that you see. So those are just I mean, I'm trying to condense lots and lots of kind of programming ideas into a short space of time, but right, I mean, I guess the primary takeaway would be, right, how do we empower the folks that we're working with, and not come at this from a top-down approach or a rescue mentality, but an empowerment mentality, and empowerment in the legitimate sense of the word, not just as a buzzword. How do we create resiliency and economic independence, and all the things that survivors need in order to be leaders, however that looks, in their own lives, in their families, in their communities, and in the world. So I'm going to wrap up here, and thank you for your participation.